Okay.
We are
There
live.
we go. We are live. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Christy here at the National EMS Museum. And of course, you know, our board president, Doc Clinchy, and we have our very special guest and one of my favorite secretaries, just because she's our secretary here at the museum, Jeanne O'Brien. She has some wonderful stories to tell this evening. And before we dive into that, we really just want to send a big hug, all of our love out to AMR in Tucson. If you haven't heard yet, they've lost one of their medics very tragically, and we just want to send our thoughts and our prayers and our love out to everybody involved in that very tragic situation that unfolded in Arizona. So you guys, we love you. We're thinking of you. Let us know how the museum can help. Otherwise, on that note, we're going to flip the coin a little bit and stay tuned, and let's hear about the good old days. Jeanne and Doc, take it away.
Good evening, everybody. I am delighted to be here with a friend of many years. I won't say an old friend because then that ages both of us. So I just said we've known each other for a very long time. Jeanne O'Brien. And I first met Jeanne when she was teaching at Creighton University. And I think I drank my way from Omaha to Kearney, Nebraska for the Nebraska EMS conference because there was nothing there but corn. So we stopped at a liquor store in Omaha, and I think I uncorked something between Omaha and Kearney, as I recall. But anyway, Jeanne, great to have you with us. I am
Thank you.
Very grateful for your continued service as the secretary to the National EMS Museum Board. And I think we found a way to do it even better because I send you the audio recordings now, and that makes it a little bit flawless. So take me back, Jeanne. Before you started teaching paramedics at Creighton, what were you doing and where were you doing it?
Well, I kind of always had a love for medicine. I actually started working in our local hospital when I was 15 years old and went to nursing school, graduated from there in the mid-70s, and I went right to work at the hospital that I had gone to school at, St. Joe's in Omaha. And I was in intensive care for 5 years, and the last 3 of those they used to call them the head nurse. So I was the head nurse, and when this physician walks into the unit one day, Anthony Carnazzo, and I told Doc before, Carnazzo, Sacco champion that did the original trauma score, and he said, "Hey, how would you like a new job?" Like, doing what? And he said, "Teaching paramedics." I said, "I don't even know what they do." And he said, "You'll learn." And so I told him I liked my job and I really wasn't going to consider it. And that took me about a day to consider it. Called him back and said, "Okay, I'll do it." And it was at the time of, for some of you people that may be listening, in the 1202 grant era. And we had 1 year left on the grant. And all my colleagues said, "What are you doing? Are you crazy? This is, we didn't even have legislation in Nebraska that no one could practice." And so I said, "Oh, I think it'll work." So I went to work at Creighton and started teaching that year. And that was just absolutely the most wonderful decision I ever made in my life. And, people would say, "Well, where would you rather work, in the hospital or in the back of an ambulance?" I'm like, the back of an ambulance without question. It's always fun, something different, just a lot of good experiences. Anyway, I worked for Dr. Carnazzo, who unfortunately died of cancer in early in 83. And just a couple of months after that, I got a call from Rick Vamaka in Sioux City, Iowa, which was only 90 miles away, and said, "Hey," he says, "we're going to start this new class and we'd like you to be part of it. You want to come and teach?" And that was PHTLS. And so I met him and Alex Buttman and Ann Fedderson and the whole original group. And we had no books. We had nothing but handouts, things that we all had written. And it was the time
So
when
mimeograph
you
stuff,
always
which nobody even knows what mimeograph is anymore.
excuse me, no, right, right. So in particular, in the very first class we did was a gentleman from Missouri who I will never forget, a guy named Dave Williams, who one of the things that we taught then is if you have a serious trauma patient, you've got to get him out of the car and take him to the hospital and do everything on the way. And so, of course, we were teaching people take them out on a long backboard, which, you know, I mean, we're not even doing now, but I remember this gentleman saying, I will never take somebody out of a car without a KED or a short backboard and strap them all up. And said, well, you're going to kill somebody someday. And so anyway, about 3 weeks later, he calls back. He was from Missouri and he says, oh my God, you were totally right. You know, had that classic patient, you know, chest injury. And he said, it was just really slick. And we just went to the hospital and it was all good. Anyway, so that's kind of how my PHTLS career started. And eventually that's how I met Doc, who was in one of our regional faculty classes. Really lucky to get to travel all over the country doing fun stuff like that. And I was in Nebraska, but I was the closest person to the Northwest. So Rick, who was the PHTLS chairman, said, oh, how would you like to take care of the Northwest? So Washington, Oregon, Alaska, you know, all of the states out here. And it was absolutely delightful. We did instructor courses and, you know, I taught every day all week. And then every other weekend, I'd be going off someplace to do PHTLS and just met a lot of really fine people. And I think in particular, I have to say, the Alaskans were so good to me. And I got to go there many times teaching classes and it was fabulous. Anyway, so did that for 10 years in Nebraska.
Was Steve Eha the state coordinator for Alaska? Or just Juneau as an instructor?
Yeah, he was an instructor, very involved. You know, some of those little details kind of escape you after a while, but he did set up a lot of the classes up there.
Yeah, good guy.
Anyway, so I taught at Creighton until '89. We did a total of, I think, 18 or 20 paramedic classes, and we did all of the ACLS for the med students and CPR and all that sort of thing. And then got a call from Mike Smith, who was working at Tacoma Community College, and said, hey, I got a great job for you. And I said again, oh, you know, I really like my job. And so didn't take me long to decide that. I actually had some family who already lived here in the Northwest. And so I moved to Tacoma, actually Gig Harbor, Washington, and taught at the community college only for a year. Mike and I were really good friends, but we had some real differing opinions on some things. And our friend Tom Dick said to us once, you know, too much power in one place. And so I actually got an offer for a job at the Tacoma Fire Department and went to work there in early '90 and was there for 13 plus years. Got our paramedic program accredited there, and it was just a barrel of fun. I retired from there in 2003 and went to work at one of the local hospitals and just been doing hospital supervisor and that sort of thing. And have now just officially retired.
Very cool. Now, when you were in Tacoma, you had a lot of contact with Mickey Kopus and some of the other folks there, didn't you?
I did. Well, in fact, I was quite fortunate because I guess I skipped one little part. When I retired from the fire department here in Tacoma, I actually went to work for Mike Kopus, and they had I don't know if you've ever heard the famous Tuesday series, where once a month they got all the medics from the county together, and so I organized those for them for a number of years and did some QA and finally a research job, and found out I wasn't much of a researcher. I just really liked teaching a whole lot better. And so I worked there until 2008 and then have just been at the local hospital since then, but learned a lot, worked with Leonard Cobb, who was already in his 80s when I was there. He came to work every day, and I mean, their save rate is no joke in Seattle. They have a gal named Michelle Olsufka who has been doing all of their research data for 20 plus years, and they record every second of every cardiac arrest. And when we went to compressions, you got to do compressions. You can't stop and look at the monitor for 2 minutes and say, gee, what kind of rhythm do you think that is? And so Dr. Kopis would get the reports, and boy, you better have done CPR 90 to 95% of the time. And
Wow.
the results were fabulous. So it was a great place to work. Dr. Cobb was just so personable.
So
and
they were very effective with ROSC, for example.
oh my God, yes, absolutely.
Really?
And people said, oh, that's not true, that a 40% safe, but that's what it was.
Wow.
I don't know if that's the exact number, but it was just a barrel of fun to sit around the lunch table every day with Dr. Cobb and Dr. Kopis, and of course all these politics would come up, and things about the medics, and it was very fun, very fun.
Very cool. What was your involvement with Norm McSwain?
Oh, Norman was always so much fun. From the actually, he was not at the first two basic classes that we did, but we did, I believe, our very first instructor class was in New Orleans.
Yep.
And of course, we had to go ahead of time to plan things and all. So I got to visit the famous Norman McSwain house, and
1212 Bourbon Street.
right on Bourbon Street. And he gave us all,
Yeah.
a silly girl from Nebraska, he gave us all instructions of what to do and what not to do when you're in New Orleans. You don't carry your purse on your shoulder so somebody can rip it off. And that was enlightening very much. And he was always just such a go-getter, and just impassioned about trauma, which was always my favorite thing, always.
Yeah.
And so it just was a really good fit. And then he was just involved with everything. He'd be at conferences that we were at, and it was just
Yeah.
always a presence, always.
Yeah, and it's funny. He was also a driver of a lot of ideas, because
Yes.
when I was thinking about the American College of Pre-Hospital Medicine, I had dinner with him in 1990. I don't know what month, but anyway, I went over to New Orleans and just had dinner with him, and we went somewhere up in the Garden District, had some adult beverages and food. And he said, I've been thinking about this idea. And he said, that's a great idea. You ought to do it. And then that was it. He just said, you ought to do it. And
You ought to do it. Yep.
and
That meant do it, Dick.
yeah, exactly right.
Yep.
So April the following year, we started it, and off we went. But it was fun stuff. Now, something you and I touched on earlier. You have taught a lot of EMTs and paramedics over the years. What do you, number one, where do you encounter them these days?
I encountered them in many fun places. I think probably one of my most favorite encounters, and I'm sure if I even asked this medic if he remembers this, I was in the ER at Tacoma General one day, and I overheard this gentleman, who was one of my very first paramedic students at Tacoma Fire, saying in almost my exact words something to his student. You need to do it like this, or was critiquing something. And I'm like, wow, that's really cool to hear your words come out of somebody else's mouth, like maybe it's stuck. But I run into him in all kinds of places. One of our students, or one of my paramedic students that, because we did all their continuing ed also, is now the Tacoma Fire Department chief. He's not a bat chief. He's not an assistant chief. He is the big guy, which is really cool to see people rise to such positions. And as we talked about, so many of them, have, they're running agencies, they're the QA people, they're the teachers. It's just wonderful to think that the things that we did make such a difference in not just their lives, but the people they taught lives. And then of course, all the patients that they've touched, that, it's just, I don't know, it's really kind of heartwarming.
Yeah.
And then I have a kind of funny encounter. We have a couple of brothers up here that started these bar restaurants called McMinimans, and they're all over the Northwest. And so my partner and I we walk in this little tiny bar in Centralia, Washington, and it was real dark. It was daytime, and I'm looking up, and there's the lights from the windows. I couldn't see, and all of a sudden, and there's 5 people in this bar, and all of a sudden I hear this, Jeannie. I have no idea who it is. So I go up there. It's one of my EMT students from Tacoma Fire. I said, "Oh my God, how did you even recognize me?" Because I've been gone from there for almost 15 years now. And he goes, "Oh my God, I'd never forget that face." I'm like, well, I don't know if that's good or bad, but and just funny place. You go to Costco, you run into them. I mean, and so many of them are retired now that you see people around. You see them on the golf course. You see them at Costco.
Yeah.
In fact, funny story, I had probably the best boss of my life when I worked for Tacoma Fire, a guy named Bud Lucas. And I was just very sad. He retired the year before I did. And that kind of had a lot to do with why I left there also. But I'm on a beach in Hawaii last winter. And this fella comes up to me. He said, "Somebody told me I needed to talk to you." He said, "Do you know a guy named Bud Lucas?" Like, well, yeah. I said, I worked for him for a good number of years. Well, he was the best man in this guy's wedding.
Oh, very cool.
He lives in Alaska, the fellow that I
Very
was
cool.
talking to. It's such a small world. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, very cool.
So, but when you say that, everywhere, you just run into him everywhere, once you've done it for so many years that
Yep.
it's fun, very fun.
Fun. And
like you said earlier, they're all retiring.
yeah.
So why are you?
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not very smart, I guess.
You love it. That's why. Because you love it.
But
The best career
you
ever.
and I have had a chance to teach so many people over the years. And
Yes.
when you start to look back and you say, okay, what have I done with my life? That's the legacy we've left behind. You know that? And you just mentioned the lives that you touched, but also the lives that those people you taught have touched and perhaps saved. So it's
Right.
almost geometric when you take a look at it. It's kind of
It
interesting.
is. It is. It's very rewarding.
And you and I touched a little bit earlier on EMS education and teaching of EMTs and paramedics. What do you think? Okay, what if you ruled the world, what would you do different in terms of how kids are being educated to be paramedics today than what you and I have seen in some places?
I think probably, and I've been kind of out of the teaching area for 10 plus years, but what I see in the students now is they just don't get enough hands-on, and also the critical thinking business of, I know the protocol says this, but think about what you're doing. And one of my things always when I was teaching, and I think my students probably hated it, but we would do on every quiz I gave, and I was famous or infamous for giving one of those every day or, at least once a week. And there was always a scenario.
Yep.
Okay, you've gone to the scene, blah, blah, blah. And in this column, you had to write what you were going to do. And in the second column, you had to put why. And so I think, and I hope that that's happening now, but I think it's much harder to get that across when there's so much online training going on that, online you can learn a lot that way. But I think to have that personal contact and have the everyday practice sessions that you would do in class all the time, that, a good half of the time we spent, in like small groups, doing skills, doing assessments, doing, and then watching other people do that. And I always learn a lot from what other people might do first.
Yep.
And, so you don't make the same mistakes, and you can learn so much from that. And so I think that part maybe is a bit lacking today. And like I said, I hope that, and especially with COVID this past year, it just wasn't possible to,
Yeah.
get together physically. And,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Using
think that's what I might.
Yeah, using that model too, what you were teaching was pathophysiology when you come right down to it. So,
Yep.
See this, do this, but why are you doing it? And,
Right. Right.
and
And, I mean, we come from the days when you had to say, Mother, may I, for everything, to
yep,
defibrillate somebody, to do any of those things. And, occasionally, they're talking to a doc in the middle of the night who's been up for a couple of days. And I said, when you've got somebody with a heart rate of 200 and the doctor says, give some atropine, you have to say, excuse me, doc, what was that? And if they say it again, you say, you're breaking up because don't do the wrong thing. Well, if a doctor tells me to do it, I'm going to do it. No, you're not.
static.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. And that's the thinking part of it is, you can't just be so rote. Oh, the doctor told me to do it. That's like, if you say, oh, the protocol, it was the protocol.
Yeah.
And don't operate outside of that. But if you do,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
going to be trouble.
Yeah, one of my famous lines as a medic on the street used to be, okay, I've dumped the drug box into the patient. You got any other ideas?
Right.
Run out of ideas. Very cool. What do you see as a career path for paramedics these days? Now, we talked earlier, and we know that a lot of them are going into the fire service because of compensation.
Right. Right.
But you and I have also encountered a number that have become very good nurses, and some have become physicians or PAs.
Physicians. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, many of them have gone, and I think that it's a great start. People. I know I have. People's kids will ask me now as well. I was thinking about taking an EMT class. Oh, do it. Do it. I said you'll learn so much just from that, and work on an ambulance for a while. See if that's what you like. And if you like it, then go to paramedic school. And if you really like it, they end up, like you said, going to nursing school, going to PA school. I told you a little story about how one of my former students got hired by the hospital that I've been working at and is standing outside the elevator with me. And Anderson was his name. And I look at his name tag and, oh, hello, Dr. Anderson. I'm Jeanne O'Brien. And he wouldn't let go of my hand. This was 10 years ago. And he said, Jeannie, is that you? I'm like, oh my God. He had been my student 20 years before that in Nebraska.
Yep.
And so, it's just, and he was a cardiac surgeon and a very good one.
Yeah.
It's delightful to see them go up the chain, or, like we talked earlier too, a lot of them are in management now. They manage ambulance services. They've done their part and, know the ropes and know what to do. And, go up the chain also in the fire departments. And so it's a really great career. I think I would encourage anybody. And, I've also had friends say, I'd never be a nurse. And I was a nurse first and a paramedic after that. But, if, like I said, where would you rather work, on the back of an ambulance or the hospital? And maybe not so much after I hit my 60s, but when I was younger, it was no doubt the back of an ambulance.
Yeah. One of the things that I will comment about, and I hope you don't blush, but I've run into a lot of good educators in my career. You are one of the exceptional educators that I have run into in our field. And that's why I've always sort of tried to stay in touch with you, because I respected you as an educator. You've been fun to teach with, and we've gotten to know each other pretty well. So maybe I'll come out to Hawaii sometime. I don't know. Anyway, any other thoughts you want to share with the people?
Maybe even just a little bit about the museum, or were you going to ask me about that?
Well, that'd be okay. We can plug the museum.
I can just, well, And all I wanted to say is, so how did I get involved at the EMS Museum? Because, you know, I kind of feel like you did that one day when one of your old students gave you a dinosaur coin that, you know, I feel like many a day. But one day my phone rang and it was a guy named Doc Clinchy calling me, and he said, hey, he says, I'm working with this group, the EMS Museum. He said, so we need a secretary, and what do you think? I'm like, what am I going to do? And he says, you'll find out, which is kind of how my whole EMS career has been. But I think the museum has just been great fun. Christy, who you all just saw also, has been really awesome at keeping things going. And you also, Doc. And it's really fun to think that we're old enough now that we are going to preserve some of these things, because perhaps people who start in EMS in 2015 and 2020 and 2021 don't know what we were doing back in 1984.
Right.
1980. No, 1970s for you. I really didn't get involved in EMS until 79, but it's just fun to go back and see some of the old things and the old faces and, you know, the old stuff that happened back then, and, you know, how things have changed so much, and, you know, and we've been able to change with it. I think that's the good part.
Thank you for the compliment. I actually started in the 60s, but we don't need to tell anybody that.
Well, I kind of started in the 60s, but just not necessarily EMS, you know, the taking care of people part, which I always loved doing. You know, it's always just been, it was such a fun career, such a fun career.
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting things we are doing with the museum is, for those of you that aren't aware of it, that are watching us tonight, we are actually going to be publishing volume 1, number 1 of our very own magazine. And talking to the folks that are working on it, I think we're pretty close. And Christy will come back and join us. Maybe she can bring us up to date as to when we might be releasing the first copy. It
is, and for all you people out there watching, if you want to
man.
contribute something, let us know.
Yeah. Yeah. When are we going to bring the first issue out, Christy?
You're hired, Jeannie. Great. Yeah, so we have officially announced the EMS Historian, the Journal of the National EMS Museum, is due for publication. I'm hoping we'll get it in the mail before EMS World, which is the first week in October. But we're doing our last couple team meetings here coming up in August. So I'm hoping everything's going to pull together very quickly. We're doing a quick turnaround here, but it's going to be fantastic. A number of stories from the archives. We have some memories being shared by our friends across the country. Yeah, it's going to be great. And members receive a complimentary issue mailed right to them. So if you are not yet a member of the National EMS Museum, this would be the time to join, because then you don't have to track down this very cool, very first Journal of the EMS Museum. So jump on emsmuseum.org. You can give us a call. You can drop us an email, chat in Facebook, Twitter, whatever works for you. Let's get you that membership. They last for a year. Additionally, we have some other fun things coming down the pipe, and I'm not going to spill those beans quite yet until I get official confirmation next week. But that's okay. August 14th, we're back on for coffee, but it's going to be a slightly different coffee where we'll give all those fun updates and what our fall tour like, and any burning desire questions you have for the museum. Be sure to send them in or join us live for a little Q&A museum update, because we have made it a year. Congratulations, Doc. 1 year of coffees. Thank you, Jeannie, for being our awesome last guest for the 2020 season. I guess we're going to start calling them seasons, just like we do in hockey. And yeah, any last words from everybody? Otherwise, it's getting way past wine o'clock for all of us, and we just might need to start the weekend.
Yeah, what I will say about the EMS Historian is, if you get a copy of that, you now have a collector's item in your personal library, because it will be volume one, number one of a magazine that is going to be published probably quarterly sometime next year. So, well,
Okay, well, let's not jump the gun.
the
It is an annual souvenir publication, so you're correct. We will be releasing it annually, along with your membership cards. New images from our collections come out with each new batch of membership cards, so hold on to those too. Those are collectors. Someday they'll be worth something. Just wait.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you all,
Thanks for joining
everybody.
us on Friday night.
Thank you.
Stay
Good night,
safe
everybody.
out there, and all of our thoughts out to Arizona. Let's help that team heal as quickly as they can.
Yes.
All right, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, guys. Same channel, same place.
There we go.
Good night.